This message didn't find you by accident, chosen one. God hand-delivered it to your spirit because it's your time. You've walked through fires others never saw. You've faced battles in silence while still choosing truth, faith, and integrity. This wasn't just survival. It was a sacred test, and you passed. While others compromised, you stayed consistent. While others performed, you persevered. While others pretended, you prayed. And now, something bold is rising on your horizon. A surprising alignment is forming, and it carries a name the world knows well: Elon Musk. To help you completely comprehend the scope of what God has just taken you through, let's divide this into 7 chapters. Because this message is more than simply material, please be sure you like, share, and subscribe before we go any farther. That you pass the most difficult test of your life without cheating, compromising, or folding is proof. Divine proof that you were put to the test in silence and purified by fire. You made it through with honor. Enter 77 in the comment section if this message is now hitting home for you. That figure isn't arbitrary. It is a code of spirituality. It denotes heavenly perfection and fulfillment. Not everyone can write it, but it's a precious signal that says, God, I made it through. I didn't quit. I didn't break. I passed. Only those who keep their souls intact while navigating the storm. Only those who understand what it's like to weep in private, follow orders without cheering, and persevere when their whole being wants to give up. This is a persistent term. It is a reminder of your resiliency, a mirror for your memories and layered revelation. Return to it as often as your soul requires, because each listen will bring to light something you missed the first time. You didn't just make it through. You made it through with honor. Heaven is now prepared to publicly celebrate you. Let's get started. Chapter 1. Spiritual, not physical, was the test. This message didn't find you by chance, chosen one, because you've been asking God, what was all this for? And here's the answer. It was a divinely appointed moment. Your performance was not the focus of the exam you took. It has nothing to do with your connections, social standing, degrees, or resume. No, it was a spiritual examination cloaked in disappointments, delays, and the everyday. You didn't even realize it was a test until it was nearly finished, which is why it struck so hard. God permitted circumstances that seemed illogical, but in the spirit they were tasks, divine riddles, and kingdom riddles that could only be resolved by faith rather than logic. You couldn't use a checklist to prepare for this kind of exam. It was intended to reveal your true self. How motionless you remained, not how loud you yelled. It's not how many verses you cited, but how many you lived by keeping quiet, being loyal, and exercising restraint. God wasn't only testing your mettle. He was putting your spiritual fortitude to the test. When it seemed like your words were hitting the ceiling, could you continue to pray? Would you be able to love someone who misinterpreted you? When your name was being attacked, could you resist the want to defend yourself? Even if you didn't grasp his will, could you still say, "Thy will be done"? This has nothing to do with your external existence. This has to do with your inner self-control. You were silently fasting. In private, you were complying. Without giving credit, you were forgiving. While no one else was there, you were avoiding temptation. And every moment was recorded by heaven. Write "Amen" to feel the peace of the angels and show your support with a super thank you up to $20. Selected 1. The fact that no one else could see it made it more difficult. You were unable to describe it. Not even sharing it was an option, because there are no multiple choice responses on spiritual examinations. They come with spiritual choices that are made every day in secret. Every no to compromise, every yes to justice. God saw every time you opted for patience over pressure, purity over popularity, and purpose over vanity. And you're still standing because of it. Your spirit was trained, not because life was simple. You passed levels in the spirit world without even realizing it. You were unaware that your silent obedience was earning you a spot in paradise. But what no man praised, God saw. What your body would have failed, you passed. You persevered while others gave up. When others resisted, you gave up. You bore suffering without becoming resentful. When everything in your life told you to quit up, you persisted. Now pay careful attention. Your efforts will not be rewarded with this next season. It's a recognition of the honesty of your spirit. You passed the exam with character, not a cheat code. God said, that one, that's my chosen. That's the one who didn't fold. That's the one who didn't sell out. That's the one I can trust with more. By maintaining divine alignment, rather than by striving for human favor. And as a result, the upcoming promotion is not only a promotion, it is a validation. This is your affirmation. You didn't just get by. You made it through with honor. And heaven will soon reveal to the world why God put you through the most difficult test. You put character before comfort in Chapter 2. Selected 1. Although it wasn't the simplest route, yours was the most compliant. There were flashier alternatives, quicker ways, and alluring shortcuts that might have produced rapid satisfaction, quick results, and praise from those who just look at the surface. However, you choose not to take them. Despite having every reason to bend, you maintained your composure. Despite all the chances to take shortcuts, you chose to go the extra mile. You were protecting your soul, while others were pursuing prestige. You were quietly laying the groundwork for your foundation, while others were selling their authenticity for a platform. It was never simply about producing it for you. Making it without losing yourself was the goal. God saw you turn down offers that were lucrative but didn't seem right. He saw you turn off glittering offers that lacked his splendor. He saw you saying no to those who would have tarnished your reputation but also improved your name. It was never a sign of weakness. That was sagacity. Strength was that. It was a successful test. You chose one and rejected what others would have rushed to. Something within of you refused to desecrate the anointing you hold. Not because you didn't need it or because you weren't tempted. You were aware of the stakes. You were aware that the crown you were working to build was too sacred to be purchased with a compromise. You turned down this world's attempt to sell you comfort in return for your character. Distractions were dangled in front of you in the hopes that you would become weary and give in. However, you were more astute than desperate. Just because it was accessible didn't mean you moved. You awaited the alignment. Indeed, you did lose a few items. Because you refused to lie, you lost your jobs. Because you refused to kowtow, you lost people. Your failure to perform cost you opportunities. Heaven, however, kept track. And in heaven, what seemed to be loss on earth was documented as faithfulness. You were put to the test by silence, delay, and rejection. And every time you made the proper decision, every time you remained loyal. And what differentiates you is that one, the one you have picked. You were choosing conviction when others were pursuing comfort. You were not in a hurry because you realized that divine time doesn't need to be twisted. So you asked, what's the faithful way? While others asked, what's the fastest way? You were aware that what God has for you cannot be taken from you by anybody and that you won't have to sell your soul to get it. Use this as confirmation. You made more than simply difficult decisions. You created holy ones. You didn't just make it through the exam. You passed it with distinction on a spiritual level. God did more than observe you. He was evaluating your character, choices, and intentions. Your name has now been marked by heaven for how you constructed it, not for what you created, for the rooms you wouldn't go into without him, not for the ones you went into, for the sacrifices you made to maintain alignment, not for the gains you made. There's more to the prize that awaits you than simply what you went through. It's in response to your refusal. You didn't fall for the trick. Pressure didn't cause you to fold. You didn't give up your morals to get favor. You paid for taking the less traveled route. Here's the wonderful twist, however. God is going to publicly recognize what you sacrificed in private. You are receiving back the comfort you gave up, the ease you denied yourself, and the adulation you left behind with honor, dignity, and tranquility that no platform could provide. Chapter 3. You were put to the test alone, but you persisted. Selected 1. The struggle in front of others wasn't the most difficult portion of your trip. It was the one that nobody noticed. It was the test without cameras, without confirmation, without congrats. It was a test conducted in solitude, in the shadows, in quiet, and behind the scenes. You didn't merely put up with criticism from a public. You made it through personal suffering. You didn't just walk by in the limelight. You went through the hidden area. God purposefully drew you away. In order to show your identity, he turned down the noise. Not to punish you, but to prepare you for what he was constructing inside you. He closed the doors for a season during which no one applauded, called, or came to your aid. In order to improve your discernment, he had to remove all distractions from your life. That seclusion was not a sign of desertion. Alignment was the cause. You struggled with your thoughts throughout that time of loneliness. You doubted your value. Moments of delay, disappointment, and betrayal were revisited. The ringing on your phone ceased. The invites ceased to arrive. People you previously assisted vanished. And people's silence wasn't the only thing. The silence of heaven was it. But you resisted giving in, even throughout that silent storm. Even when it seemed like your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, you persisted in praying. Even though you didn't feel any difference, you continued to fast. Even when it looked like no one was paying attention, you continued to show up for your mission. Even when it seemed like heaven was silent, you continued to glorify God. That is what distinguishes you. When they feel neglected, most individuals collapse. But they were forging you. God has no intention of shattering you. His goal was to make you indestructible. He wasn't attempting to gauge your level of popularity. Your purity was being measured by him. Because the task at hand requires a degree of confidence that can only be developed in solitude. You didn't simply make it through that season, chosen one. It sharpened your edge. You emerged more determined, devoted, and unafraid. For God to fill you, you had to be empty. To allow your soul to hear, once again, you were hushed. In order for heaven to retain you long enough to cure you, you were concealed. Your qualifying season was the quiet season. God saw how you responded to being misinterpreted, how you let him fight while you stood still, how you didn't protect yourself, and how you didn't slap back. It goes beyond endurance. Maturity is that. Spiritual strength is that. Kingdom discipline is that. You weren't asked to return to the old rooms. You awaited the construction of new ones by God. And now, that exam alone serves as your proof of elevation. Heaven is going to give you a public promotion after you passed in secret. When it didn't seem productive, you remained loyal, and now the fruit is ready to spill over. What follows isn't a compensation for what you demonstrated to others. It is a reward for your actions toward God. No one could see the tears that he witnessed. The prayers you didn't publish were heard by him. Even when no one was applauding, he documented the hours you spent writing, praying, constructing, working, and healing. Therefore, don't hate the time of year when you're alone. That served as your training ground. Your spirit was cultivated there. You were put to the test there. You passed there as well. Chapter 4. You walked away clean despite temptation. Let's be honest, you picked one. You weren't attacked gently by the adversary. He approached you where you were most in need of solace. He observed your routines, saw your prayers, and then attempted to catch you sliding at the times when your heart felt most vulnerable, during the hours when you felt like your strength was depleted and your soul was strained. Not only did he deliver storms, but he sent strategy. He sent seduction instead of noise. He brought chaos instead of opportunity. And he attempted to divert your attention with pleasure when he was unable to win you over with agony. He sent individuals with the correct words, but the incorrect attitude. He unlocked doors that were traps disguised as blessings. He hoped you would fall for his quick money, quick shortcuts, and quick approval. However, you didn't. You hesitated. You said a prayer. You made a distinction. The pressure was felt by you. However, you recalled the pledge. You were looking for relief. However, you recalled your duty. You were weak for a time. However, it was your soul, not your body, that made the choice. You are hazardous in the spirit world because of it. Because when the stakes are low, everyone can say no. However, when the temptation was targeted, you answered no. When it fueled your agony. Selected one. The adversary intended to use a covert sin to tarnish your soul. He intended to use a soul not to twist your timeline. With a single choice, he hoped to postpone your fate. One click, one yes. One instant of giving in to temptation. However, you left clean. Not flawless, but safe. Favorite, but not perfect. You understood that one mistake might have cost you the next 10 years. So you weren't rattled, but you weren't affected. And the test included it. God spared you the embarrassment of that temptation. He gave you permission to use it to hone your judgment, test your inner stance, and reveal if your heart had really healed or whether you were still clinging to what he had previously saved you from. And you passed the selected one. Your no in secret just saved a generation's blessing in public. So even though you won't earn a standing ovation for it, you will gain an extraordinary promotion as a result. You're not even aware of what you just managed to dodge. The soul bonds that just shattered are invisible to you. The adversary just lost their lawful access. It would have felt lovely to remain, but you just ensured the heavenly acceleration by leaving. It wasn't a little moment when you shut it down. You were just shifting something in your lineage by obeying, and it was spiritual warfare. So rejoice in your own triumph, since you were being praised for your bravery, while others were falling for fakes. Chapter 5. Even when no one would have known, you didn't cheat. Selected 1. One of the most significant and challenging challenges you have ever encountered did not take place in public. It took place behind closed doors in the shadows, in the quiet when no one was looking. You were not the center of attention, and no accolades were certain. You had the chance to inflate your testimony, take shortcuts, skip steps, portray something as completed when it wasn't, and appear further away than you really were. Additionally, you could have escaped punishment. Nobody would have confronted you. Nobody would have doubted your advancement. Behind the curtain, no one would have seen anything. However, God would have. It was the true test, and it was sufficient for you to answer no. Not how you behaved in front of the applauding audience, but rather how you conducted yourself in private. Not your performance under duress, but your integrity in private. Not what you created with assistance, but how you maintained your moral character when no one offered to help. A blessing may have been perverted by you. You had the option to coerce a connection. The fruit might have been counterfeit. You had the opportunity to utilize your suffering as a springboard. You had the option of using falsehoods as bricks to build your reputation, but you chose not to. Despite the annoying weight, you remained in alignment. You remained faithful to God's timetable when others were succeeding. Even when it appeared simpler to be dishonest, you remained truthful. The holy way, the hard way, is how you accomplished it. Heaven is now answering, because God considers more than simply outcomes when choosing a chosen one. He observes the path. Just as important as where you're going is how you got there. And you took a noble path. Although it hurt, your approach was pure. You are a pure witness. You are really obedient. Your offering is holy. You could have sobbed in private. You could have been weak at times. There were times when you almost caved. There were times when taking a shortcut seemed alluring, but you refused. You prioritized procedure above output, and you were eligible for the following step because of that decision. In actuality, anybody may seem fortunate. Anointed sounds may come from anybody, but behind the scenes, not everyone is spotless. You do. God is going to raise you in a manner that no one can dispute because of this. Nobody will be able to claim that you modified, falsified, or purchased it. Because your fruit originated from a root they didn't see, people will be perplexed by it. A foundation rooted on covert submission, unseen loyalty, and clandestine obedience. The procedure was not cheated by you, and the promise is now arriving with no concessions. The platform wasn't forced by you. God is now constructing it under your feet. You didn't act like a different person. Your true self will now be magnified by God. Don't regret taking the long route then. Don't be angry at the slower speed. Don't wish you had followed other people's paths to success, because you're going to rule where they hurried. The integrity test was passed by you, and God is going to give you something that can only be unlocked by honor, because you assured heaven that you could be trusted when you decided not to cheat. God always gives trust with land to the chosen one.